up and running. So we should be going. Good evening and welcome to another presentation by United Parent Council and the Gifted Department at Paradise Valley Schools. I'm Melissa Schwartz. I'm the Gifted Chair for the United Parent Council. And tonight I'm going to go ahead and pass this on over to Dr. Vergez.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. This is a special event because tonight we get to hear from two of the leading experts in the field of gifted education who focus on supporting gifted students' social and emotional needs, basically. They come from different backgrounds, and I've known both of them for a number of years. And we, as a gifted ed department, have used a lot of their work that they're going to draw from, including their new book, which we are actually, our gifted teachers are doing a book study on following these workshops that we've held. We held one for today, and they spoke with teachers, and the message was fabulous. They got a lot out of it, and it really spoke directly to your kids, to working with your kids, supporting them. And I'm really looking forward for you to hear their message. So it's my great pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Jean Peterson, and she is a professor emeritus from Purdue, but she also has worked as a teacher of gifted, as a counselor. So she's got a very wide background in working with these very topics on academic underachievement, and does a lot with group work. And so she talked to our teachers a lot about working with students in small groups. Some of our publications include several books that we have worked with, used with our teachers in the past, but this new one, they wrote jointly together. And this is what a lot of their talk tonight is going to be based upon. So Dr. Peterson has won numerous awards for scholarship and for her work in this field. So I'm very, very pleased that she's able to join us again. She was here a couple of years ago, but this is a special event because she's partnering with Dr. Dan Peters, another good friend of mine, who is a co-founder and executive director of the Summit Center in California. Dr. Peters comes from a different side of this background for this work, in that he's a psychologist and works a lot with assessment and treatment of children, especially gifted children. And some of his work focuses around some of the things that we as parents see in our children and as teachers see in our classrooms. Overcoming worry and fear, learning differences such as dyslexia, twice-exceptionality. You may have I remembered that he was with us a couple of years ago, and he spoke to his then most current book, Make Your Worrier a Warrior. And this is a teacher's and a parent and a children's version, but we as teachers have also benefited from that, and along with his other work. So I am going to leave his bio there so you can read some of the work where he's done, and hopefully Dr. Peterson as well. And if you're intrigued by tonight, I strongly encourage you to look up more of their work online. So it's with great pleasure that I introduce them for tonight's speaker event, which is, I think, was it our third for this year already? So thank you for joining us. And more importantly, thank you for supporting gifted education in Paradise Valley.
Thank you, Dina, and thanks to you, all of the work that you guys are doing in your district. It's very impressive.
Always impressive. So everyone, we like to do a conversational format. Jean and I have spent lots of time over the years talking about these issues, and are completely aligned in our values, and we sometimes find that we come at them in a slightly different angle, which was really the grist for the book. And so a lot of this is going to be us asking each other questions and bouncing off of each other, and then we're going to save some questions for the end. So since Jean, you asked me the first question with the teachers earlier, how about I'll start and ask you the first question.
Okay.
And why did you feel the need for us to write the book that we did?
Well, I know that I think the genesis of the book came far in advance of our actually doing it. We thought about it a long time. And I think both of us thought about how there's such a need for practical approaches and kind of a down-to-earth, nitty-gritty, day-to-day, everyday view and making sense of giftedness and helping people make sense of it. Parents make sense of it, make sense of their kids, what they see and observe and see in behaviors and whatever. I just, and I think, I remember when we, at one point, it was just, boom, we got to write this book. And then of course it takes a while to write a book. So now I feel really blessed by the opportunity to work with Dan. Let's put it that way. I'm at a very different place in my career than Dan is. But anyway, the book we drew from our backgrounds, mine as a teacher, counselor educator, researcher, and Dan is a clinical psychologist. Those are different backgrounds, but what we discovered with each other was we are kindred spirits in how we see the field and the needs of kids.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and our gosh, we started talking about it when we presented for the first time together, which was actually several years ago. I mean, it was a long time ago, and we kept talking about it, and of course, things didn't align until they actually did. And those conversations always, well, let me take one step back for everyone. So when I came into the field, I felt that there was just a lack of, coming from a psychologist perspective, I was just sort of shocked with how little social and emotional and clinical material, conceptual material there was in gifted. It was so much gifted education and curriculum, which of course is a main part of gifted education. And there's this early book on different models of counseling that Jean was one of the few contributors to, and writing about a systems approach, the approach that she used. And there were other leaders in the field of counseling the gifted. And all of a sudden, Jean became sort of this clinical hero to me. And lo and behold, at my first NAGC conference, I think there was a pre-conference with Jean when she was first starting to share some of her poems, which ultimately became a book. And I had the opportunity to really soak in her approach and again, find another kindred spirit among a conference of lots of educators who at the time were largely focused on education and less, there was like a small strand of social emotional. Fortunately, that is growing. And we started to, once we started to, I remember going up to you after it and talking with you, which you might not remember, introducing myself. And I don't know how we continued to stay in touch, but we did. And ultimately, all of our conversations were talking about the whole child and taking into account the whole child and what that meant. And really, the book, that was a guiding factor. That name was in many of our working titles until it was left out. But it was really like, how do we encapsulate the complicated, that was also our original title, complicated instead of complex, the complicated developmental aspects of gifted and twice exceptional, or bright, because some of these kids don't get the label for a variety of reasons, these bright kids, and help people understand them, like find them and understand the multiple layers of their development and how to help them grow and also be aware of their struggle. And
create programs that would be appropriate for a wide variety of kids. That, of course, takes a lot of creativity and mission and perseverance on the part of teachers in gifted ed in schools. But I did it. I mean, I came into gifted education kind of in a different way from many people. I was asked to come and lead a high school gifted program that was not very complicated. I think they had future problem solving and they had some career shadowing. And that was it. There weren't even many advanced placement classes at that time. But that was the opening, that was the open door for me to come in and say, okay, if I care about these highly idiosyncratic kids, nobody like anybody else exactly, and they're complicated, and they've been in my classes. I had taught for 20 years at that point in the classroom as an English teacher and a writing teacher, and I could just see that how interesting their thoughts were, and the insights. They blew me away. They were so impressive. But these kids were not all high performers in the classroom, and that intrigued me from the beginning. So that's really where my philosophy came from, and how I approached the field. And I didn't have anybody shepherding me into the field. That's another thing. I sat by myself at the convention several years before I found kindred spirits, because I think I was the only one from my state actually at one point. And it was really lonely, but there were some sessions on social and emotional, and that's what caught my attention. And then because I had been intrigued by kids that were very bright but didn't achieve well in the classroom. Now, heavens, we understand a whole lot more about why that might be. But at that point, I was just interested in underachievers, and not how underachievement develops, but how underachievers are developing. And then I came to this conclusion as I saw some of these very bright kids that hadn't done very well in the classroom, but I knew were very bright. I saw that some of them went on to college and did well. And some of those high achievers, I was very well aware of how much they could do classroom work, but they didn't make it through the first year of college. And I thought, wow, that's blowing a few stereotypes here. So that's why when I was kind of drafted in to run that program, I decided I want to have a program that's complicated. I didn't have anybody's to look at except the one that had been in that school before. And I thought, that doesn't sound interesting to me at all. If I were a kid in this school, what would I want? What would I need though first? What would I need? And not what would I deserve, but what would I need? And that became my driving force. And that drove all of my research, because I had known all these kids. I ran a whole bunch of small group discussions, about 100 kids a week or so. I did that for 5 years. And that's where I got the ideas from the kids discussing what needed to be studied. So I became a messy studier in a sense, because I'm a qualitative researcher. I don't get turned on by statistics, and I'm kind of cynical about them sometimes when I think what they can't do and what they can't tell us about the complicatedness of kids. So I became intrigued with interview-based literature, interview-based studies, even if I had to do a whole lot of interviews, because qualitative work is hard work, qualitative research. So anyway, that's where I got where I became driven. It was to answer some of those questions. What is it with these underachievers? What is it with these high achievers? Why did they falter later? Or why are they killing themselves? I mean, I knew that at that time. That was starting at about that time. We were starting to hear about that, but they were so bright. They had so much going for them. Why would they be depressed? What do they have to be depressed about? That's what we were hearing. And so I decided, that's intriguing. I think we better understand this. So that's where I went.
So let's talk more about underachievers and achievers, because we know that parents in the audience have one or both. And also we know context setting. This has been going on for a long time. And then we've lived through COVID and virtual school and COVID life and all of these factors, which we couldn't have even anticipated would have occurred. What did you find on the underachiever side and on the overachiever side? What do they need?
Fundamentally, they need people not to give up on them, and not to say if they are underachieving in 7th grade or junior in high school or whatever, if they're underachieving, that isn't how they're going to be the rest of their life necessarily. Maybe, but we don't know. And I did studies following them, or looking backwards and saying, okay, here are these kids graduating with an underachieving sort of GPA. What were their other years like? When did this start? When did the underachievement set in? And did they turn it around before they graduated? Some of them did, actually, quite a few, but one in five, I think, turned it around before they got out of high school. But many didn't, and then went on. I followed them for 4 years after high school, and many actually did change. About 50%, about half of them became achievers or moderate achievers or high achievers in college. They did better in college than they had in high school, which is kind of an intriguing thought too. What was your main question, Dan, this time?
Okay. Well, this is it. Like what happens to them, but also what they need, right? As the parents are listening, and you said someone to believe in them, and also what I'm hearing is not to basically write their destiny by what's happening in 7th grade.
Because we actually can send those messages. We can say, I mean, you're lazy. If you would just put forth effort, look what you could do. I mean, that's just become like a refrain that is so ineffective. You know, I just say, please don't talk to underachievers that way. You don't have to be a cheerleader. I don't think that's very effective, like empty cheerleading, like rah, rah, rah. I'm going to high five you every little step you take. I don't think that's the answer. But I just think standing beside them and just saying, yeah, life is complicated. You know, you seem to be struggling with something right now. That's what the approach I would take as a counselor. Talk to me about that. Tell me, you know, how are you feeling about school, or about the class you're struggling with, or, you know, what is it that we should understand? Help me understand. I think that's the best way to go. They need people to be interested in them, and not to talk only about the struggles and not to talk only about underachievement, but to be interested in them. Like, you know, what turns them on?
Right.
What are they interested in? What would, if they could study something just on their own, what would it be? And that doesn't have to go anywhere. It just means that you're interested. What do you do after school, you know?
Right. Well, and this is where the sort of mindful, purposeful parenting comes in, where they pick up on everything we say. I mean, they absorb everything we say. It actually could go straight to their identity, particularly when we have the late elementary school and middle school, early adolescence. And when we're talking about, like you said, you know, you're lazy, but you're so smart. How can this is so simple? Or, you know, God, just think if someone else could use your brain power and actually apply themselves. Or there's so many iterations. And those are all natural things to say with frustrated parents. And what we would say is not the thing to say. And conversely, there's this over celebration and over reinforcement naturally to our overachievers, who in some respects as parents, like, wow, especially for those of you who have an overachiever and an underachiever, like in so many respects, the overachiever is so much easier. Like they get good grades, they study hard. They're a good fit.
They're a good fit in the classroom. Underachievers often are not a good fit in the classroom.
Well, they might be a good fit, but they also are often perfectionistic, highly anxious, highly internalized, having challenges with sleep, having stomach issues, having anxiety.
But you're talking about the high achievers.
Yeah. If we go back and forth, right? So it's not that one is better than the other. They're both different versions that we see at different places in life. And we just want to be mindful, right, of how that child is. We talk, especially Eugene, developmental, where they are in their development, and development is always developing. You know, Gina, as we write to each other in email, you always refer to your own continuing development, right? But what happens is there's parent worry. So we see, and I've been there, we see our kids struggling at this point in time, and my brain is really good at going, wow, if they don't accomplish this task in this amount of time, that's going to make these tasks even harder. And then what's going to happen? And we have to be aware that worry parent thinking often makes us maybe act or say things which are not the messages we might want to give someone who's just struggling at that point in development.
And the focus stays then on performance, which is the part that drives me crazy in the field. The field is a lot about performance. If you go to conventions and conferences and workshops, it's often about, and researchers, what are they about? They're trying to figure out what is that kernel that can make kids be motivated to achieve. Because what they find in research is they're not motivated, they don't have goals, and the school isn't meaningful. And I'm thinking, it's way more complicated than that, in my opinion. And I want more research to look at that complicatedness. What are the life circumstances going on? What are the, and that's really hard research to do. I mean, that's what I was doing, and it was very hard.
Right.
It's very hard to write it up. But we don't understand the complexity of that. And we don't understand the complexity of high achievers, because they've got so much image to protect. They don't want to disappoint people. They feel the expectations of the family, parents, grandparents, whatever, whoever. They feel that, and they have self-expectations that may be overpowering.
Right.
And so they become preoccupied with the performance aspects. And the performance is only one aspect. And we have to remember that as parents. Dan's a parent, I'm a parent, and we know how that is. We have to figure out how not to beat something over the head all the time. I'm not talking about the kid, the issue, to just go after it, because it becomes unproductive and ineffective.
Well, and many gifted overachievers, their identity is completely wrapped up with the product and the grade and the outcome, which we call a fixed oriented mindset. And if with that mindset, there is no room for doing less than, for exploring something new and maybe not doing well at it, because they're only smart and gifted if they perform at the level that people are used to them performing to. So they really luck. Yeah.
A lot of pressure. Yeah.
I'm thinking related to move to your term of the asset burden paradox, because that comes into play in what we're talking about as well. So share with people, where that came from and what that means. Jean is frozen. And Melissa, are we still good?
Yeah, I'm not quite sure why she froze.
Okay.
Let's see,
We're still rolling. Okay.
She's still here, but obviously something happened.
Okay, I'll start it off and then she'll jump in. I'll set it up. So Jean came up through her work with the asset burden paradox, which we write about. And if you think about, I'll explain it the way she, you back, Jean?
Yep, hold on. There
Okay.
she is.
All right, Jean, I'm setting you up. Yet just have to unmute. So the asset burden paradox came from when she was actually working with a highly gifted person that she was doing longitudinal work with. And they were writing on two sides of the page, her assets and her burdens.
How giftedness was an asset and how giftedness was a burden.
Thank you. Thank you.
And I did, and they were, because she was a very difficult circumstances in her family, and there was abuse. There's lots of kinds of abuse, and school became an unhappy place because something turned from where she was a superstar to being bullied. I mean, it was just an incredible shift. And, just relatives and siblings and all of that, it made her life was very, very difficult. And I studied her for 15 years, from age almost 15 to about 30. So you can imagine all the developmental stages of shifts that went on during those 15 years. But at one point, pretty far along in the study, because I then wrote it up and published a couple of articles about her, about the study. One was about development. And that's where I really got tuned into development, so that I consider myself a developmentalist in the field, not having to do with cognitive development, which is often where the field goes, but social and emotional development. That became my passion, really, as a result of that study. But at that one point, I was just trying to sort through really 1,000 pages of data, interview data, single spaced, and trying to figure out, what sense should I make of this? And then I started making a list of, well, how was giftedness supporting her? Well, it helped her have good relationships with teachers at a very young age. She got attention in many ways for her good mind. She was had insight. She was able to think herself out of difficult situations and so forth. How was her giftedness a burden? Well, it put lots of pressure on her. And her parents said later in her life that they didn't know what to deal with a kid that bright. And I think that's not an unusual situation. They were uncomfortable with her brightness, even though they were bright people themselves. The burdens came because of peer issues, sibling issues, thinking too hard in a sense, being highly sensitive and hypersensitive about school, peers, relationships, everything. It's that we always say that, giftedness, show me a gifted kid. Well, we'll see somebody who is highly sensitive to the environment, to environmental stimuli. Okay, all senses tuned in all the time. They may not show it, but if a person has got a good active mind, that's going to be there. Intensity, overexcitability, as we say, when they are physically overexcitable, sometimes that gets misdiagnosed as ADHD. We've got people that are sensually overexcitable, imaginationally overexcitability, which means highly creative, and that's not necessarily a good fit in the classroom. And intellectually overexcitable, meaning they just a voracious learner and, just to the point where they wear people out around them. So those are the kinds of things that, those can be burdens. And that's kind of where that second column was. It was, okay, we've got the assets, how giftedness is an asset and in their favor, and then how giftedness is really burdensome. And in the end, she said, she had an interpretation of that. She said that the overexcitabilities helped propel her to get through all the awful stuff that she was dealing with, propelled her forward. And until she could cognitively make sense of all of that, which she eventually did, and has continued to have to struggle with that. And now she's young middle age. But that asset burden paradox, both at the same time, these kids are living with that paradox all at the same time. All kids don't have that kind of difficult life, but they are still, in my opinion, tuned in, tuned in to their contexts, to others' feelings, and to what's expected of them, and the news on TV or whatever comes across the feed.
Both as a parent and as a clinician, it's always been important to me to help kids understand their overall profile, because all too often there's only one part that gets focused on. So if you're gifted without another exceptionality, it might just be you're really good at math, you're super smart, you're a great reader, you're a scientist. You're going to be a this someday. That becomes
part of the identity. That is
the identity.
Who they are.
Right. And so that's an over-identification, because there's other aspects of that child, which might include you keep your feelings inside. You might have trouble finding people who think like you and understand how your brain works. You might not understand the social skills or what's going on socially or as quickly as some of the other kids. And then conversely, with the twice exceptional population, often those kids, although gifted and bright, are really focused on their deficits. And it's either because it's been focused on in school before it finds a wonderful program, like in Paradise Valley. But a lot of these kids don't have these programs, or they are not diagnosed. So then they're like, what's wrong with them? They're so smart, but, and then it's, well, they have sloppy handwriting. They can't read very well. If they're anxious, I can't, answer questions in front of other people. I don't understand things socially. So it's really important to help kids understand, especially these kids who really run perfectionistic, as we'll talk a little bit more about, how to understand, as Jean was saying, that their assets and their burdens from giftedness, but also all of their abilities, all of, like, as much as they can relate to, from the strong to the weaker, as a normal developmental profile. Because what happens again is these high expectations on gifted kids because they do a lot of things well, and then these perfectionistic aspects that many of these kids take on, and then there is no tolerance for something not working out, for not being the best, and a complete fear of being a fraud and being a failure.
Yeah. Yeah. And what Dan just was talking about there can be fed by parents and grandparents and guardians and coaches and directors of talent areas. It's very easy to start, push, push, push. It's not really, you can't really put a frame around that kind of pushing, but it's really pushing toward this idea that you can be perfect. If you just do this a little bit better, then you'll be okay. And it's a conditional love in a sense, if you could just knock a couple seconds off your crawl and the swimming, just think, what would you be if you could just do that?
Yeah.
So it's like anyway, I guess my work in the field has sort of made me at times cynical about the emphasis on performance, because it just seems to just gobble up everything else. It's like a snowplow that doesn't leave a lot of room for the whole child.
Mm-hmm.
And I am concerned about the whole child. I'm a counselor, and you too, Dan. With your work, we see kids that haven't benefited from that kind of attentiveness and push. I don't know, maybe I'm overstating that, but I mean, they have not benefited from that. They are high stress kids who the future might look bleak to them. And that could start very young. I often in my talks in the past have talked about like little kids, 5 years old, 6 years old. I know, because I've heard them worry about how to be a parent someday. Who's going to teach them?
Right.
Or worry about how to get a job and what kind of a job and that kind of thing. They can be very serious at very young ages. So I say, as a counselor, we need to start thinking about counseling, as a developmental challenge, counseling the challenge of figuring out your direction, which can start very young. Gifted kids shouldn't wait. You shouldn't have to wait till they're juniors in high school before they start thinking about careers. They can start doing that, not per se when they're 5 in preschool and primary grades, but they can talk about what is a job. How do you get a training for a job? Just because parents are educated doesn't mean that the kids get that by osmosis. They don't. I mean, we think they do. Why shouldn't they get it? After all, we're coming home from work every day or whatever, but we just assume that, and they're worried. That's some of this young anxiety.
And you're bringing up I think the importance of individualizing the parenting for that particular child, because we have these kids that are thinking deeply at age 5 about the whole lifespan. Mm-hmm. And we have others that are very stressed out about thinking about it early and don't want to think about it early. And we don't need to make those kids think about it early. They're like, I don't want to think about that. They don't have to think about it. But if you have a gifted worrier, we have to think about that, because you're only 5, don't worry about it, you have the rest of your life to work. That doesn't work when the minds start turning. And for those of you in the audience, if I asked you to raise your hand of who has the gifted kid that once it gets quiet at night, the wheels start spinning and they can't turn their brain off, and all of the worries come when all the distractions are gone. It's a lot of them. And then that's when they want to talk to you when you want to go to bed, or that's when they want to stay up to distract their mind and be on their phones or stuff that we don't want them to be on, because they have all of these worries and they have all of this thinking and they have all of this input that we aren't even aware of, particularly when you get to late elementary school, middle school, and beyond with social media and social pressures. And they're dealing with all of that. And we want people just to be aware that there's so much more going on.
Yeah.
And I can say as a parent, like, we have like no control over. And something, Jean, you said is like how to, how to notice them, how to help them be seen, how to hear them. And it's hard as a parent, especially of an older child who doesn't necessarily want to share when you want them to share. But let's talk a little bit about, the questioning that you have found helpful, that is not off-putting or defensive provoking in talking to these kids.
I wish I could do a 15-minute workshop here right now and go through a few simple skills. The main thing is, for me, is don't question. If you're going to question, ask open-ended questions. Something like, so how was your day today? Instead of, did you get an A on the test? Okay, how was your day today? What kinds of things would I see if I were in school waiting for the bus? Like, what would I see if I were there, or in the lunchroom or the locker room or whatever, if you're concerned about bullying, for instance. How, well, when is your day the easiest? That's just a wide open question, no pressure. And you may not get something, you might not get anything, but you might get a little discussion going there. Well, if they say, well, and then you say, well, help me understand that. So you mean like when you go to lunch and she's not out of class yet, and then you just kind of go in, you're sort of summarizing or paraphrasing. It's kind of just a simple skill. You can just sort of do that to show that you're paying attention. Everything we do when we're listening is to show that we're paying attention. So for instance, too, if you said, they say something and you say, well, tell me more about that. Tell me more about that. That's just a simple thing. And you don't do it like, tell me more about that. You say it gently, so that they feel comfortable expanding, because they talk in code a lot. Yeah. And we need them to give us more detail. I had another thought about making statements instead of asking questions. I wasn't trained in counseling to do that per se, but because I'm a counselor educator, I was training counselors for several years in my second career. And I began to think, I'm going to tell my students, make a big deal of the fact that they should be making statements rather than asking questions if they're conversing with a counseling client. And that means, like, instead of saying, so what did you do today? How old were you then? Those are nice, concrete questions and everything. But instead you could say, when they say, today was really a bad day. Well, sounds like this wasn't a good day. You just make a statement back that's sort of like what they said, but not exactly. And you can always start with sounds. If they've got any emotion involved in it, you say sounds, and then you put the word on, like, well, that sounds frustrating, or that sounds disappointing. I can see why you were disappointed. Wow, that was a tough bounce right there. I'm just making statements. I'm just feeding back, responding to what they're saying. And that's a way for them to feel heard, right, which is the key. Right. Heard. And right. A lot of kids don't feel heard.
Which is different than the parenting role that we often step into, which is fixing, circumventing a crisis, or what we feel is a crisis, being proactive. And what happens when that's really, typical parent responding, we shut down our kids. I mean, often, like, they're done. Once we start doing that, they're done, or they decide, they're not going to tell us stuff because they don't want to have to go down this road. And they don't feel seen or heard. And I think the greatest gift we can get from them is a relationship that both gives them space from us, but also that reflection of, as you're saying, of being seen and being heard. And it comes with respect. Gifted kids require and expect respect as human beings, they have less tolerance for disrespect the way that kids are typically treated. And what I want to say is we don't, like regular adult to kid is not always that. It's we tell kids what to do. We tell kids what to do and when to do it, which most of us would say we don't like that in our own lives, in our own relationships, in our own jobs. But that's part of our system. Gifted kids don't respond well to that.
Yeah.
And they usually respond to respect. And in mindful parenting, what we're having to really do is be aware of our dialogue and what we want to say and ask ourselves, would this be a good thing to say right now? Like give yourself your own litmus test. And I do this all the time. I have so much to say. I have so much advice. I have so much experience, I think, that I'd like to share with my kids from all of my experience clinically. And it could be such the wrong thing to say. And sometimes the best thing to say besides nothing is, oh, wow. Yeah.
I call them monosyllabic responses, and then with a very expressive face. And we're not being, we're not putting down our work, Dan. This is artful.
Yeah.
And parents can be artful in how they respond too.
Yeah.
And we need to be artful.
Yeah.
Because we need to send the message that they matter, and that our job isn't just to shape them up and make them toe the line. I mean, I was trying to think if I could give a couple of examples, like not just the sound that sounds frustrating, but like if they're talking about a peer. Oh, so you've known her quite a while now, right? You can just make little comments like that. You don't have to have an agenda.
Right.
Whatever is coming up, they come home and they say, yeah, her mom and dad are away for a while or whatever. And you say, well, that's interesting. You can just say anything non-committal, but you are engaged.
Yes.
And that's the key.
That is the key.
They're interested in their peers.
Yes. Well, and I think when we talk about respectful parenting, which that is respectful, that also bridges to collaboration.
Yeah.
And so what happens is in like typical parenting or the outside the gifted world, when people see a lot of parents of gifted kids parent, they say, oh, wow, we see who runs the show. Wow, we see who's in charge, or wow, they really walk all over you. That all, by the way, can happen. What we talk about in the book is collaboration. Collaboration is, again, coming from respect where, yes, you're still the parent, but we really espouse setting limits when limits are set for safety, for guidance, but leaving as much room as you can for that child to have independence and autonomy and freedom, given their developmental age, given their level of maturity, but really allowing them to have a voice in the technology plan, in when they do their homework, in the activities or the tutoring that we think they need or the enrichment. It doesn't mean that they decide everything, but with collaboration, gifted kids do really well when they have buy-in. They do really poorly when they are forced to do something that they don't want to do, they don't understand why they're doing it, and they don't feel they have a choice. Now, to be fair, there are some situations where that is required, but we want to try to stretch and give these kids a say and collaborate as much as possible. And we generally get better outcomes in relationship and in outcomes in whatever the task is that we're working on.
I'm going to add one point that is rarely seen in the gifted ed literature. And it's not often in the counseling literature, at least not as often as it should be, I think. And it's parentification of kids, and gifted kids are vulnerable to that because they're so smart and because they act like little adults, which they're not.
Right.
We assume then that they can handle anything. And so we give them content that is not cognitively beyond them, but just socially and emotionally, they're not, that developmentally, they're not there yet. So that's something to be aware of. So when we're talking to them and responding, we have to remember their age. Social and emotionally, they're more like their age peers throughout the school than they are, socially and emotionally, they may be quite average or below average. We have to remember that. So when we're giving them this high-powered material, information, they may be okay with that, but not with high-powered, complicated material about social and emotional stuff. They may not be ready to receive that developmentally. I was going to just make a little turn here to make sure we get this in, and that is this, our concerns. We're talking about them here.
Yeah.
But this whole idea that what I wish that all people could understand in this world is that being bright affects everything, all aspects of life, everything, anything you can name. It's not just the classroom work, and it's not just being uncomfortable in the classroom. It's everything, the feelings, puberty, going to the next developmental stage, leaving home to go to college and not wanting to leave home, on and on and on. All of life is affected because all contexts are being responded to hypersensitively all the time. Another point that I think we've alluded to, but I want to emphasize it here, hiding distress. Emotions are scary because gifted kids are so smart that they usually can control everything, and emotions can't control everything with emotions. Emotions can be just downright scary, and they feel frightened with emotions, so they just don't feel. They can shut those emotions off. Some kids will throw tantrums at very young ages and so forth. At some level, maybe they're scared of that. Or maybe that's just their way of getting control. Throwing a tantrum is a way of getting control, in one way of looking at it. But the fact that emotions are so scary means that they are likely to hide distress. They don't want to show them. They don't know what people are going to do with them. When they hide shame and doubt and worries and things like that, when that's all under the surface because they don't want to disappoint people who are invested in them, that's when the pressure cooker image is kind of a common one, but I want to be a little softer than that and say when they're just bearing all these things and not expressing them, they don't have the language to express them, they don't get any practice expressing them. That's why I argue for social and emotional discussion groups, because in a very softball way, not shaking the family dirty linen out, that is not what those discussion groups are about, but just talking about growing up, because I think they get gypped in general. People are so concerned about their academic stuff, and they are too. And even with their peers who are intellectually like them, they may not be talking about growing up comfortably or about emotions. And so whatever we can do in our programming that allows them to develop expressive language, I think is a good thing. And then along with that, I don't believe they lean on others very easily in general. They don't go to the school counselor in general. I've heard that for years. They'll say, well, isn't that for other kids? Gifted kids don't. But some gifted kids do go, and some gifted kids really need to go because they are a ticking time bomb.
Well, and many also are keeping it together and fine and excelling at school and come home and are emotional wrecks and explosive and behavioral. And they do keep it in all day and then they let it out at home. But it doesn't mean they're going to go get help.
School is conditional. Home is unconditional. Yes. They can do whatever they want to at home in some cases, and they won't get kicked out of the house. Yes. In school, that may not be true.
I know we're about 7 minutes out. Should we open it up for some questions?
Yeah, good.
Sure, here. I do have a question. We have a question from a parent. You had mentioned that sometimes the school model isn't a good fit. If an elementary student is not a good fit for the current school model, what are some alternatives you would suggest?
Go for it, Jean.
Yeah, well, what I just said about the small group discussion, you can do them. I don't know if they work really well at the primary level, but maybe by third grade, second grade. I've tried it at all levels. But then you have to keep the group small. If you're at the primary level, you keep the group small, maybe three kids, so that there's a little bit of, interesting give and take and everything. And you're working towards some social skills too, so that helps. So I think that's in the programming for little kids. I mean, if they're being pushed, if parents are mostly concerned about acceleration and being able to feel good about the acceleration part, and then it's hard to convince parents that you should be spending time in the gifted ed program talking about growing up and about worries and things like that. I'm so devoted to the group idea.
Yeah.
Because I've just seen it just do such wonderful things. It doesn't have a goal. It doesn't have an endpoint. We don't do a test,
But I'd argue that even if you can gain in social emotional development, if you have a twice exceptional child or you have a highly advanced accelerated child, that might help the social emotional, but we're still going to run into the issues of why it's not a good fit. So I just want to acknowledge.
Oh yeah, very good. Thank you.
We need to figure out why it isn't a good fit. And that would be a discussion with the teacher, discussion with the school counselor, potentially a discussion with an outside consultant, educational consultant, psychologist. Because I mean, at our center, we're working all day long with gifted and twice exceptional kids that don't have a good school fit. For a variety of reasons. So you really want to involve the team to figure out why, and then see what modifications, accommodations could happen in school. And do you need to look outside of school? Do you need to look at other types of learning environments? So I think it's a big, good question. Mm-hmm. There's just lots of reasons it might not be a good fit, and we need to figure that out.
Well, and I guess where I was kind of going with that is that if you can do only one thing, I would say do the groups, do the social and emotional, because you're going to meet more kids, you're going to address the needs of more kids. And that's why I was so glad that Dan was my co-author, because he's so good about understanding the 2E world and figuring out, kind of what to do and so forth. So just trust me that in the book, there's a lot in there about that. I look at the 2E population. It's a population, highly idiosyncratic. They're not all alike by a long shot. But if you put them in a group with kids that are not neurodivergent, am I saying that correctly?
Yes.
They're
neurotypical.
They're neurotypical. I was looking for that word.
Yeah.
But if you put them together, there's something valuable about that, because they're being heard. They're getting to know other people. If they feel that they're strange because they have a learning disability, another exceptionality, then they need a place where that isn't going to be a bad thing. And that is where the groups come in. Mm-hmm. You can take kids from all different cultures, all different, even, I like to put gifted kids together at the same intellectual level. But other than that, I think put the divergence together, and it kind of it becomes a place for a school to feel okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Dan, I'm going to jump in here with just to ask a little bit of an additional question. So when you're talking about these groups, are you talking about them in the school or in a classroom or some other setting?
Well, actually, my books on groups, which include the questions you ask and the topics that are appropriate for whatever age group and so forth. Let's see, where was I going with that?
The question is, do you have them during school, or do you have them outside of school? Or
they're great for homeschooling. They're great around the supper table in any house, but they're also okay in school. I did all of mine in school, except in the summers when I would do the Purdue Gifted Ed program here. and help with the social and emotional curriculum, we had groups and they came from all over the world. And what they said at the end was, we all seem to have the same problems.
Mhm.
We're all going through the same challenges. And I thought that was, I mean, that just happened. They were coming from, I think, 13 different countries at that point.
Well, in the first several years of your groups in school were during lunch periods, and you were, working with schedules, and they were all happening in school.
Yeah, in school. And then I never took them out of class.
Yeah.
We had double lunch hour. And so we would use that each. And then there was a little study hall involved in there. It was very flexible.
Well, now we have 12 minutes for lunch, so it's hard to do it, yeah.
It's hard to get food too.
You can do a group, and I studied a school that had about 20 minutes or a little bit less, 20 minutes to do a topic, and it was middle school level, and it worked. And
I just wanted to share with you that one of the parents did send a comment that said this was very helpful. It reinforces a good deal of the information that they've heard before, but to better understand their child and the characteristics that are not uncommon. So just wanted to share that comment for you both so you could hear that. I'm going to take you off your spotlights because I know you're stuck here, and whoops, I don't know how to remove yours. Oh, there we go. It moves on the screen. So we should be able to have all of you visible here. So thank you very much. I just wanted to point out for anyone that may have joined us late that this will be available via our YouTube channel, and it will be, of course, available on our Facebook immediately. But our YouTube channel has many years of programming, which features both of you in different presentations that we've had over the years. And that I've put that in the chat, so you can find that again. I'll put it up here in just another minute. So thank you again. United Parent Council hosted Adam Brooks yesterday, who was also talking about how for parents to speak to their children or with their children to try and get longer responses out of them when they're discussing things. So if you would like, parents, you might want to take a look at that at our YouTube channel as well. And I'll pass this back over to Elizabeth and Dr. Riaz.
And by the way, the same publisher that published the book that we're talking about tonight published numerous versions of my talking with teens and talking with kids, gifted kids. Two of them are for gifted kids. And I'd recommend them because they give you the questions and they give you some instruction in the introductions, about 20 pages, like it's a short course in running groups. And if you're conscientious about studying that, then I trust you to run the groups because it's tricky. And there are certain little things to pay attention to so that you can be ethical and legal and all that kind of stuff. It's actually not, it's not all that hard. And the books just really tell you what to say.
And I would like to close by actually telling you that, yes, a lot of we've used this book for her, especially with our high school, middle school, and high school teachers. And we have found that's one of the beauty of us having gifted programs, self-contained gifted programs, content or place where our kids are together every single day for at least 1 hour, or if not longer. So we're able to do some of these things that you so beautifully articulated why we do it and how it works and why it works. But most importantly, I love your message to parents about having these conversations because our kids need it. And we so appreciate you being here, listening to this later. This is why we do this, because we know that we want to help your kids and share as much information as we can with the leading experts in this area.
Well, and we want to support you in your good work.
Well, then you'll have to come back next year then. Thank you, Dr. Peterson. Thank you, Dr. Peters. We so appreciate your work and your time and your sentiments.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Good night, folks.